Hello, everyone. This is Justin Cobb coming to you from Arlington, Virginia, USA. And thank you all for tuning in. I am so excited. This is another wonderful episode of Insights. And today I have this awesome guest. Her name is Amber Hollowell. Amber is a change maker. She is a peacemaker. She is a bringer of light. She is the founder of Transparent and does all kinds of beautiful work surrounding parental empowerment for trans youth. Amber, thank you for coming on to the show today.
Thank you for having me. Yes, like you said, my name is Amber. I'm coming out of North Carolina. So we're actually not that far apart from one another. I was raised in Eastern North Carolina. Now I'm actually near the capital. I'm near Raleigh, outside of Raleigh. So yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing to start us off on, like for me, myself, I was late bloomer. I was a stay-at-home mom. I had wanted to be a nurse midwife and instead got married, had kids really early on. And so when I went back to school, that was always really my drive was honestly bodily autonomy and whatever surrounded bodily autonomy. And part of that was because of my life journey. Unfortunately, things hadn't always been that easy for me. And I felt like there were certainly moments growing up in the South where I felt like the rural South, that I felt like as a woman, I needed to be seen, not heard. Really keep your head down and your mouth shut. And that was kind of the upbringing that I'd had. So coming from a place that pretty much taught me to be quiet about my autonomy, turn the other cheek, if you will, about everything. Oh, they're trying to take this away. They're saying this about you. Turn the other cheek. And so it put me into a lot of situations where I didn't fight for myself. And so then when I finally came out into my advocacy work in my 30s, not even my advocacy work, that was my degree. My advocacy work started probably in high school. But by the time I got to that point, it was just clear that everything that I was about surrounded being able to make choices about what was best for yourself, what was best for your own body. Yeah, so that would be the early accomplishment or the small bits of it.
I love it. And a lot of this work that you're talking about and what you've yourself have gone through in your own struggles with this is rooted in this bodily autonomy, taking ownership
Yes.
of your destiny and your journey. And I love the fact that you are bringing in the connections between, because a lot of people, before we really dive into this, so there's an understanding that seems to be missed in a lot of conversations regarding like trans youth, trans individuals, but also in terms of women's bodies and even men as well. When we talk about labor, like your autonomy of the body, you're having your body respected and your individual agency regarded with this understanding that you have options and you have the freedom to make choices. And it's a very hot button conversation. It's certainly one that I grew up very much walking on eggshells all the time. And I'm in rural Pennsylvania, so rural North Carolina. Oh my goodness. I have a feeling we could have conversations that will last for hours.
Probably. I mean, I'm 47, just turned 47. So for me, like we grew up in the South where again, women didn't stay a whole lot, which was really odd because I came from a family that men were definitely the rulers of the household. The women were the homemakers, right? Even though my grandmothers worked, they still ran the house and the husband pretty much was the breadwinner. And that was how the roles, responsibilities were. And then for my parents, my father was very passive aggressive and very kind of patient, sat back and did his thing, while my mother was more the one who ruled the house. So it's a very different dynamic. But at the same time, I was still being taught, turn the other cheek, keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, right? And I can remember later, honestly, only in probably the last 10 years having this conversation with my mother. I made this comment one time about, you didn't teach me to stand up for myself. And she was like, Oh, my father taught me to stand up for myself. And I was like, your father taught you to stand up for yourself. You taught me to turn the other cheek.
Mm-hmm.
And those are two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, that meant that no matter what someone did to me, I was to take that, say, it's okay, and keep on trucking.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't have a choice. That was my voice constantly being taken from me. And I didn't even realize that then, honestly. Like, I definitely knew with some of the assaults that I went through what was being taken. But as far as like just having my voice and feeling like I'd never really owned that, I think when I really first started to find my voice, I didn't even know how to speak because I had sheltered it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions you asked me was about my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And my childhood was, we grew up very rural, very country. So we in the woods. Like I was always out in the woods or reading. In my book, I was quite a bit of a nerd and geek. And so I was always reading about something or outside exploring in the woods. My father was very much a naturalist. So learning the plants, the flora, the fauna, all that were very deeply ingrained with us that we respected the earth. We understood our environments, those types of things. But there was very little emotional intelligence. And that wasn't my parents' fault. They just had parents who didn't have the tools to give them. And so they didn't have the tools to give me.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a long time to see that, but that was what a lot of it was. And so I also grew up very religious, Southern Free Will Baptist. And with that was ingrained in my mother. Anytime that I came to her with a negative feeling, a fear, doubt, being bullied at school, anything of that matter was always said, don't say that. Shh. You're putting words in the devil's ear. And that made me shut down emotionally. So I never came out, didn't feel like I had safe places to speak, didn't feel like I had places that I could voice any of my concerns. When I was going through trauma, I didn't feel like I could talk about my trauma. It was okay to talk about it in a therapist's office, but don't talk about it at home.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very difficult to navigate. I had a lot of mental health issues in high school. I tried to take my own life my senior year because of all this trauma and not being able to speak about it. Honestly, it was always like keep it all in. And I was about to implode. So when I went back to school, got my degrees, came out in advocacy, part of the thing that I saw with trans youth in particular was if I felt all that turmoil and had no support, what must they possibly feel?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when my son came out to me. It was like, okay, so if I felt all of that and I aligned with my body, what would it be like if I didn't? How much worse could that possibly be, that agony to carry? And coming from a place that, and again, not my parents' fault, but because there wasn't emotional support, I just, I see the gaps that we have right now. I see the kids that are coming out with mental health disorders, the loss of life, the substance abuse disorders, the homelessness rates. And it all starts with the youth, the trans youth. And if they're not being supported at home, what happens is that they go to all these other places looking to try and self-medicate
Mm-hmm.
or to heal, right? To get into a safer environment because home is not safe. So runaway may be the only way that is safer for them. That still puts them at a much higher risk. And if we don't support our traumatized youth, they become traumatized adults.
Mm-hmm.
I was a youth that was not supported. And I can tell you as an adult, I was a very young mother raising 3 kids, all with different levels of neurodivergence. And I was traumatized. And I still didn't look at my stuff for another decade because I was too busy parenting.
Yeah.
But you got to be able to have yourself put together to parent. So I did the best that I could with the tools that I had, but I certainly learned to curate more tools along the way. And certainly now I've got way more tools to be able to navigate that. But I think there is a lot to be said about being self-aware enough to realize that about yourself. But that comes into to play with my parents, with the clients that I work with, because a lot of times the parents that are struggling the most can't get beyond their ideologies, their beliefs to see their child. They believe because we raised our kid this way politically, we raised our kid this way religiously, we raised this kid this way morally, that they should feel the same way we do. And when they don't, when their kid comes to them and says, "No, I don't feel that way. This is me. This is who I am." There's this reaction that our children are supposed to be carbon copies of ourselves, and that's not the truth. Typically, when I really have really obstinate parents, sometimes I have to go, was there anything your parent did that when you were growing up, you were like, "I am never going to do that"? And typically, every single one of them can at least tell me something that their parents have wanted them to feel that they did not feel. And I'm like, okay, so if you can understand that your parents raised you in this way, but you didn't believe that, why is it any harder for you to grasp that your kid feels differently than you do now?
I'm curious because let's point out the obvious. You're growing up in a very religious Southern Baptist household. And I can't speak for your experience. I know I wasn't raised Southern Baptist, but I was raised Baptist. And like history aside, they all have a lot of things in common. One,
Yep.
the shaming of mental health, if I'm not mistaken. The shaming of the trans and other members of the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
And on top of that, there's just so much unresolved issues regarding like the socio-political concepts of race and gender on top of that, and disability.
I mean, there's so much. I mean, honestly, when I started to unpack all of mine in my early 30s, really started to address, because I will openly say in my early 20s, I was homophobic, I was transphobic. I'm so lucky I grew before my kid came out to me. And I had a chance to unpack all of that. Some of it was getting away from it. Like I moved away from my hometown at like 18, 19. That helped part of it. When I started school, being educated, being able to unpack religion, unpack race, unpack all these things that I hadn't necessarily been able to see growing up. And that does take quite a lot of growth, because when you're talking about the church, I kind of had to walk away from the church. I'm very spiritual, but I would not say I'm religious, because what I did feel like I had been taught my entire life didn't line up with how people actually treated other people. And I couldn't be kind, be fair, be open, be loving, and yet you're hurling hatred. You're excluding, not including. He didn't tell people to like push people out of the church. He called on you to draw people in. And that's just from the little bits that, again, from my childhood that I remembered, that just, there was such a divide there for me. It really, unfortunately, a lot of those things stemmed from my religion. Okay, you can't be gay because that's evil. You can't, gay marriage, evil. Adopt children, evil. This is all evil. And it all went back to my religion. Every single bit of it, I really don't want to say that. But for myself, it was very much tied into my upbringing in the church. And we were fair, and my mother now will own it. I really felt like we had been groomed by the church. My mother not even realizing it until even me pointing it out, and her really looking back at it going, "Oh, wow." And I'm like, we were just always told to keep our place. It was a way to, I grew up, I will also say, Southern Free Will Baptist is very hell and damnation. Where you talked about the shame. There is not a lot of gifts here on the earth. Everything is after we leave this earth on the next plane, right? But here it's apparently all doom and gloom. And I can remember telling my babysitter at the age of 5, she'd come out and tell us we need to come in, get baths, get ready for bed or whatever. It's getting late. And I'd said, no, I wanted 30 more minutes or whatever, a little bit of sunlight left. And I remember being in the bathtub on my knees praying until the water was cold. Please don't send me to hell for saying no to my babysitter.
Oh my.
That was at 5. That was at 5. That was that indoctrination already in my head that this is evil. That was wrong. You can't do this. And even my mother later in life, how I'd reacted in certain situations, she didn't understand it. And when I really started to unpack what I felt like I had been taught, she was like, that's not what I was teaching you at all. And I'm like, I understand that's not what you were teaching, but that is how I took it in.
Mhm.
That is the information that I received, and that's how I processed it. And so that's what shapes us. Whether or not it's our intention as parents to do that, we all have a different perspective
Was
and,
there a
and, and
moment?
experiences.
Yeah, was there a moment in particular where you where it happened and you said, you know, I need to start unpacking, or what was that process like for you?
Unpacking was probably early 30s,
Mhm.
late 20s, early 30s. And I had got married early at 19, had my first kid when I was 20. And because of that upbringing, my ex-husband and I had gotten pregnant. And so we got married. And I had been given the choice. You can get married, or your uncle is a lawyer in the next town over, and he knows couples that can adopt. And those are my choices. My ex-husband left. He wasn't ready to be a dad for a good month or so before he came back and said, I think I've made a mistake. And I'm like, well, you know, the baby's not here yet.
Mhm.
So we got married. And I felt forced into that. I felt like my hand had been, one hand tied behind my back. Your kid? So for me, that was a very difficult choice where I was already feeling like my voice was being taken, right? But that marriage was very controlling. And because I'd already come from sort of that controlling household, it was very easy to go from being told what to do here to being told what to do here. And by my late 20s, I was drowning on the inside in my marriage. My ex-husband was a serial cheater. He just constant. And I was always dealing with that, which I always took out on myself. You're not good enough. You failed in some way in the marriage to meet his needs, so therefore he's got to cheat. It wasn't the truth of it. He just didn't know my value. But for me, looking in a mirror and going, what you want to be at 18? This is not you. Who are you looking at in the mirror? And I had put on so many masks to meet what he wanted, to be the person my mother wanted, to be the person my sister wanted, to be the person that society wanted, to be the person that everybody wanted. I didn't know who the hell I was. So at 30, that was all like pretty much I was imploding on the inside. And if it didn't come out, if I didn't start unpacking it, I was going to fall to complete pieces. And that wrecked my marriage because finding my voice was not something that my ex-husband was really prepared for.
Mhm.
I'd never told him no. The day he moved out was the first time I told him no. That I told him to pack his stuff and get out, that I would not be treated like that anymore. I wasn't going to allow him to treat our kids that way anymore. He was teaching our kids. He's teaching our daughter it was okay to be treated that way by a man. He's teaching our sons it was okay to treat women that way or other people that way. And I didn't agree with any of the above. And I felt like I'd been so stifled for so long and not able to say, please don't say that to our children. Please don't speak that way to me. Please don't speak that way to, you know, anyone else, that when it came out, I couldn't shut it off. And so we just butted heads until pretty much we imploded. The marriage imploded within a couple of years of that because I couldn't stay silent anymore. I was no longer that little quiet person, and I had like unleashed something that, quite frankly, that's not what he married.
There's there's a level of sacrifice, I feel, speaking from my own personal experience, that comes from owning your power. And the difficult thing is, and I always go on Insight, the various platforms, and I talk about own your gifts, own your skills, own your talents, own your voice. But I want to be transparent with audiences. Owning all of these things, it does come with a level of sacrifice because not everyone sees value in your ability to do these things. And it's because they don't see your value in doing these things that they were essentially aligning themselves with powers that be that are stifling, that malign and judge and are always looking to like mold you into something that does not serve you. And breaking away from that is probably one of the bravest things that anyone can do. There, Amber, I'm curious because you founded Transparent, and it is this wonderful podcast that is doing this so much work. But walk me through this journey of your son coming out to you, because here you are, you're a cis woman who went through her trials, and it's but then you have your trans son come to you and share his truth. Like, what was that journey of recognizing his truth?
Um, my son has always been rather out of the box. He's an intellectual, and he's an intellectual that, I'll be honest, from the time I think he was 12 or 13, I was having to kind of pretend that I was still winning the conversations, because there were times that he was over my head already. That I was like, what did he just say? I'm gonna have to go Google that. Like, I'll be back in a minute. Go in the other room and Google what he just said. Like, what's my kid even talking about? Because he was that far advanced. But he was always just himself. Wasn't a super nurturer. Didn't fit any kind of gender role. And I didn't really force my kids into gender roles. There were times that I definitely, yes, wear a dress. We had formal Christmases, dinners, and my grandmother would buy my kids clothes to wear. She did my whole life too. We did get dressed up for Christmas dinner on Christmas Eve. And I think probably about, I don't know, 10 or 11 was the last time I forced him to do that. Because he just was getting very anti-dress skirt. And I was like, that's fine. That's fine. I only made it for that one occasion. And then after that, I was like, wear pants. I don't care. I'm going to start wearing pants. Wear pants. Grandma can't say anything if I'm wearing them. And I think, and it was just, he wasn't interested, female or male, in any direction. And by high school, I think he came out around his junior year and just said something along the lines of, I think I might be asexual. I might be agender. I don't really know. And I'm like, okay. You have any questions? No. Okay. And just went on. And I figured he would figure that out on his own, and I needed to give him the space to figure those things out. Plus, we were coming out the other side of my really angsty, horrific marriage. So I knew that there was trauma there for my kids that they needed to unpack. So again, whether or not he was involved with someone, I really wasn't paying attention to. It was more, was he okay? And then when he went to college, I had started college myself at the same school at East Carolina. And so I would commute in where he was living in the dorm. And so there were weekends I would pick him up. He'd come home with me on Friday, and I'd drive him in early Monday before my clinicals and drop him back off at campus. And his second semester of his freshman year, he calls me up about midway. And he's like, Mom, well, actually, he emailed me. And the email was pretty much, I'm emotionally starting to get in trouble. I'm not in trouble yet. I'm not going to hurt myself. But I can't stay here any longer. Mm-hmm. Every time I look in the mirror, it's a lie. When I go into the female bathroom, dorm bathroom, it's a lie. living with a female roommate and I don't feel like I can get up and get dressed. I can't bond. Always feeling under a microscope because of the roommate and the boyfriend of the roommate always being there. Just didn't feel like he could be himself. And finally was just like, Mom, I think I'm trans. And I had that like 2-day, not knee jerk, but are you sure? And I hate that. I hate that. I hate that. And what I really realized about that within about 24 to 48 hours was that are you sure was my fear? Because I already knew what trans people were up against.
Mhm.
And having just gone through nursing schools, I also knew even more so what they were up against. Politically, I knew what they were up against. I knew from my own transphobia 2 decades back what my kid in North Carolina was up against. And that put a ton of fear in me because I didn't want to see my kid in the crosshairs of someone's hatred. But again, I had to sit with that and go, you know what, that's my fear. And I am not going to put that on him. And so I just went to him and said, I'm sorry. I did not mean to do that. You do what you need to do. What do we need to do? Do we need to go see doctors? Pronouns? What do we need to do? And we just started working on the things that we could do at that time to start getting him aligned with where he needed to be. But I let him, figure that out on his own without pushing him. I know a lot of parents want people, tell me, what does this mean? What do you mean you want different pronouns? What do you mean you don't identify? They don't know either. I think that's the point, is that we have to give them that space to figure that out. There's no rush in it. At 30 years old, 32, separated, coming out of a marriage, if I'm just beginning to figure out who the heck I am at 32, why do I expect my kid who's coming out of the closet at 19 to be able to give me his whole biography?
Mhm. At that point, the child is still learning about themselves. So they're still learning their story. They can't even tell it to other people yet.
Right. And so that's kind of where I do kind of let parents know that, sometimes we do need to kind of push back and give them the space to kind of figure out what it is that they're feeling. It could be temporary. It could be permanent. That's their experience. That's their life. I'd rather him go through and try and figure these things out now than later. Because what I will say, what I've noticed about the generations is when I look at my mother's generation, the Boomer generation, people who come out in their late 50s to early 60s. When I look at my generation, I'm seeing people who come out in their late 30s to early 40s. When I look at the generation below that, it's around 30. When I look at my son's generation, it's around 20. So we keep getting younger where people feel like they can be more authentic. They have more freedom to come out earlier. I think part of that is because there is some understanding in the public eye, right? That everyone has a right to exist and live freely the way they choose to, authentically. Not as much as I'd like, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see a lot more. But I feel like because there was this slow, steady kind of pickup on it, on people being like, oh, we accept that, we accept that. We have kids now who are kind of like, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm not asking whether or not you're okay with this. This is who I am. This is who I'm going to be. And I don't know if social media played a little bit of a role in that, right? Because everybody is be on camera, be on camera, be on camera. And I don't know if that in a way has helped some youth come out earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's almost like they're internally blogging, but they're doing it externally on their phones. So I don't know if there's this way that they're growing through themselves, through their own journaling, self-dialogue. But I do see that there could be so much more. The boomer parent, or not boomer parents, but my generation of parents, there's a half and half. I definitely see mothers who are supportive. I don't see nearly as many dads. My ex-husband, granted, he accepts his son, but then he moved to Miami, Florida. And one of the first things out of his mouth was, when are you coming to come see me? And my kid was like, never, you're in Florida. And he just didn't even have the common sense to think about where was it going to be safe for his 27-year-old to travel to see him.
And that's
And
where,
those are just, those
yeah,
are little things that you do have to think about. And if you were really thinking about your kid, you would have kind of taken that, because this next consideration is Tennessee. And my daughter is just kind of looking at her dad like, again, are you ever going to move anywhere that he feels safe to travel to? Not that North Carolina is much better, but we are a little better than Florida and Tennessee at the moment.
you also have roots there. And I tell people all the time, and this is sort of what you were touching on with what you were talking about earlier, how each generation essentially leaves the groundwork for the next generation to pick up.
Right.
And it's, I don't want to even call it sequential. It's almost because it's cyclical, because we do work, we think that work is done, and suddenly we're swinging back around and it says, oh, wait a minute, we still got more to go. And
we still have way more to go.
And we still have to go further down. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh. It's like, no,
right,
you
like
gotta
we had Stonewall, right? Like, we've done this already, right? Like, why are we back here again? But that's the political part of it, right? That is part of the political that goes into it, where we swing right and we swing left, and then you have the other party comes in and go, okay, they swung way too far to that side. We've got to shift it back to the middle a little bit more. So we have this constant push and pull. And that is honestly, when Transparent came out, I had wanted to be women's maternal health. I'd want to be a midwife. And part of that was I have really, really wanted to improve the maternal mortality rates and the infant mortality rates we have in this country, which are horrific. And I was going to go learn Eastern medicine practices to bring back to Western medicine to hopefully update some of our birthing practices and ways to help with delivery. That just one of the little pieces of it. So when my kid came out, that automatically made me shift autonomy from, okay, what does it look like in women's reproductive rights to what does it look like for him? Because I come through 2 nursing schools, and that was because my father died in between. My father had metastatic melanoma. So I did 1 year of nursing school at one facility, then took care of my father until he passed, and then went right back into nursing school. And started over at another college because they only took one of the 9 courses I had already taken. So start back at the beginning when I go back to East Carolina. And what I realized in all that was we were never taught anything about gender identity. So in all these different sections of medicine that I'm taught, whether it be peds, whether it be the elderly, whether it be people with respiratory, whether it be disability, whether it be mental health, we're always taught first how to uphold the patient's bodily autonomy, right? And what I realized was, where is this for people in the gender diverse community? Where is the autonomy? And at my private school, I took an elective called Human Sexuality. And that is the only class I ever learned anything about gender identity. And my kid hadn't come out yet. And I remember he had already been looking at top surgeries because he wanted a gender masculine chest. And I already knew this. And so I'd gone up to my instructor after class, and I think my kid's maybe 15 at the time. And I went up and I was like, so my kid is looking up top surgeries and specifically gender neutral chest surgeries. And my instructor looks at me and goes, good luck with that, and walks off. And I was like, oh, so we can teach bodily autonomy, but when you want to have a private conversation about it, your religion slips back in, because this was at a religious institution. So it didn't necessarily surprise me. I was very surprised the class was even offered, to be honest. It wasn't even offered at my public college. So that was even like, what? But what I really noticed was, again, we had nothing about how to uphold their dignity, whether you were talking about a child who's struggling with their identity, whether you were talking about a teenager, whether you were talking about someone with a mental health who was in crisis, whether you're talking about hormone blockers and puberty blockers, whether you were talking about someone, a trans man who now needs maternal health care because they want to have a child. None of these different fields are being taught. And what I've told people is if you're not taught how to uphold bodily autonomy, then those healthcare professionals that come in could bring in their bias and their discrimination. That's what they're leading with. They're not leading with what they've been taught. They're leading with bias because they've not been taught anything. So then their discrimination can easily slip in that door, and it becomes, and what I noticed here on LinkedIn was I had people who were going through different surgeries within the community, and they wouldn't even be top and bottom surgeries. This would be, I need an emergency appendectomy. I broke my leg and I need to have screws, a rod and screws put into my leg. And it would range from nurse to doctor to radiologist to lab tech on what their treatment was, whether or not their pronouns were honored, whether or not someone would dead name them, whether or not someone would go, well, I'm not going to uphold that until you show it to me on your ID that you've changed your gender marker. There was such a wide range. And what I realized was we had just neglected this entire community when it came to bodily autonomy. We don't do anything that says uphold their autonomy. Instead, we give parents children's autonomy to make their choices with. And the parents don't have to live in their child's skin. And they just don't. So that really just pointed out to me that we had a very clear gap. Eventually, I do plan to work within, it may not be that I actually write the legislation because I don't really want to go into politics, but I do want to be the voice behind getting people to push to codify bodily autonomy at the federal level. I think if you did that, we didn't touch on it, but my thesis with Death with Dignity, that is because of my father and several cancer members within my family who died really hard battles. That was a choice I wanted for them so they could make what was best for their healthcare decisions. And that goes to women's health. It goes to trans rights. It goes to veterans and whether or not they get care and all the red tape they have to go through. Terminal illness. There are so many things that we should be able to make choices for that unfortunately in today's element politically, they're being stripped away. Where politicians are coming in and saying, we get to choose what type of health care you get. We get to choose whether or not you have access at all. We get to choose how we define terminology of science without a background in it. These things have heavy sway. And I know people hate talking politics because I'd have people come in my rooms and they're like, I don't want to talk about politics. When you're talking about healthcare and access, you're talking about politics. That is where it's written.
The body is the most political thing, especially in, well, I was going to say in the United States, but honestly, even outside of the United States, literally
Everywhere right now.
Everywhere. The body is the most political thing, period. I was actually just on a call with a sex educator down in Brazil for this work. And he was sharing about how, like in their country, there are so many hoops and hurdles and challenges, despite Brazil having this narrative where they are freer, where people are more open to talking about sex and everything. It's still a struggle over there. And
Yes.
it really does go to show that this is a universal struggle that all people are going through right now.
I think people we're so stuck on labels and putting people into boxes. When we talk about gender, people want male or female. Make it easy. But we know that's not the truth. And I just think sometimes it takes a little bit longer for everybody to catch up to where we're at, to be on the same page, right? So that we can progress. And I hate to say it, but I say it quite often. When we have people as old as they are in politics, that's the politics they're going to write. is what fit them and their prom of life. And they're not in their prom anymore. And they don't have to live with the consequences of what they're writing either. So if you've got someone who's 80 years old writing your healthcare bill, well, think about what healthcare was 80 years ago. Think about what it was 60 years ago when he was 20 years old. Did women even have choices back then about their own bodies, or were husbands still making them? Husbands were still making them. I myself, when I was born in 1977, my father was not allowed in the delivery room. The doctor came out to announce my birth and lit a cigar in the hospital, in the lobby. Like, this just tells you where we've moved from what was okay and acceptable then to what is okay and acceptable now. So if that's just for general hospitals, and we're not allowing smoking within hospitals where there's open oxygen anymore, why wouldn't you think that gender identity would change? Why wouldn't you think we would learn more about these things and that people would be different? And I think that's the problem, is that we've gotten to where everybody's got to fit into a category and none of us are the same. To me, we'd be absolutely boring if we were all the same round peg that fit into that hole. We're not. And I think that's part of what makes my son beautifully unique, is he is exactly who he's supposed to be. And that's his choice. He gets to choose that. I'm not choosing that for him because I don't have to live in his skin. And I think if we got to where we respected people again more and said, you know what, you have the right to make that choice for yourself. It's your choice. Then we could move the needle a lot further with progress. And we get so stuck into, again, those labels of it's got to be this, it's got to be that, when it should just be what's best for that person, whatever that is. And I hope that we get there. That's my plan for us to get there at some point. That's, like I said, codifying bodily autonomy so that people can make those choices. I think that's a way to get around, unfortunately, a lot of the anti-trans legislation that's come out the last 2 years. I think if you codified that at the federal level, then you would not be able to push back against it. I don't think you'd be able to take away their health care. It angers me because you can see how one-sided it is. When you really start picking apart those anti-trans bills, you never see anything about anti-trans males playing in male sports. You never see any anti-trans bills that specifically state that trans males can't go in a bathroom. They're all about females. And it always comes back to that female power and what that power dynamic is. And I think that's what we're still playing with. This is just a new way. Oh, well, we can't make them as mad as we used to about women's rights, and we can't make them as mad as we used to about gay rights. So let's pick on somebody else. Who can we pick on? Ooh, trans people. Because you have to make people angry to get them to go vote.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's the reason why in the last 2 years it came out so hard, was again for them trying to fire up their base to get people to go vote. Because they're honestly, what maddens me is when you compare it to something such as school shootings and the damage that does to children. And we could actively change that, but we do nothing. And yet you put the highest amount of bills for any legislative topic in our congressional history, 2 years running, for less students than are killed a year to school violence. It doesn't make sense to me.
A lot of things don't make sense.
Right. It really doesn't. It goes back to that power dynamic, though. And it does. Like, they know that's what they can be extreme on. Like, that's what a lot of the candidates knew they could be extreme on. Saying it, oh, little Jimmy's going to school and having trans surgery at school without the parents knowing. Like, my stepdad is a teacher. If people listening at home don't know this, teachers typically had to buy their own supplies for their classrooms. Schools don't have the money, at least in North Carolina, to be turning anybody trans or to give anybody surgery. I had to get permission, the school would call me to get permission to give my kid a Tylenol. school nurse. So there's so much misinformation and disinformation. I don't think social media helped with that, because we don't have people who are cracking down on what is misinformation and disinformation. And so then that just catches a flame. And when you've got our political parties who want to go out and use people's right to exist as a political point to stir the masses, to anger the masses about,
Oh
you
yeah.
really paint a target. You paint a target on people. And that's the most disturbing part of it. My son became a refugee. To me, in my eyes, most members of the LGBT community just became refugees in our country, depending on what happens over the next 4 years. And that's frightening. Is it going to stop me? Heck no. It just makes me more resolved to keep pushing. Do I think I'm going to be able to go to the White House or Congress and get something passed in the next 4 years? Absolutely not. Do I think we can make progress and steps toward that so that the next term? Yes, I do.
And people underestimate the power of small things too. And it's something that we, as a society, speaking from my own personal perspective on this, like, yes, I'm upset with the Republican Party in the United States. I'm upset with like the Tea Party and all these various elements of the conservative push, like this conservative movement. I don't even want to call it conservative anymore. It's a nationalist. It's like,
Right.
it's fascist at this point. So,
Fascist.
yes, fascist. But I'm also upset with the Democratic Party as well in this regard, because you all had the power for how many years, and you were given the opportunity to codify and to make sure everything was there, so that way we would be protected from incidents like this. But now here we are literally having to protest and rally and organize around these issues, and we have to do it with against a party, a group that doesn't play fair and is not interested in playing that ball game.
Well, I mean, I think I do feel like the Democratic Party could have done more in the last 4 years. I will say that the House and Senate were so heavily stacked that it was going to be hard pressed to get anything pushed and put through. Solidified, it would be an executive order. And if you do it by executive order, that's almost an immediate, the next time the next person comes in, flip it right back over. And that's what we need to get away from. We keep, here's some rights. No, take those rights away. This push and pull thing we keep doing every 4 to 8 years, we have to stop. And just get back to, what is it? Lady Liberty's feet. That we were supposed to be a welcoming country, that we welcome people who were looking for hope, who were looking for better opportunities. But we should also be able to offer that to our own people.
Yeah.
And we haven't been able to offer that to our own people, to all of our people, in a very long time. And I feel like we need to get back to that, to where we're human-centered. And if we've gone to this power-centered thing, where honestly, common people don't exist. When it comes to Congress, the little people don't exist. It's the top 5%. That's all that exists in their eyes, because that's who they're working for. We've got to get it back to where they're actually working for us again, for the people. The healthcare system I have the same problem with, because it's built for profit, not for people. Healthcare has been built for profit. It's not been to take care of people, especially not in the US. The US, we band-aid problems. We don't get to the root causes. We want to medicate everything. Here's a pill, here's a pill, here's a pill. We can pill it away instead of actually getting to what the root of that issue is and fixing it so that you don't have to take that pill every day. And yeah, I'm frightened about what's going to come in the next possible 4 years and throw science out the door. But I do think that it does with the legal advocates that I've talked with. In fact, I've got one coming on this weekend on transparent or transparency. We really are kind of just seeing that we're just going to have to lock in. They've done this before. We've had to do it before. We're just going to have to keep rallying and keep pushing forward. And, for parents out there that are nervous, I get it. I get it. Unfortunately, I lost 2 clients within the first week of the election results because their children didn't see another option,
Goodness.
knowing that Trump was coming back in. And I know that's the beginning, because this group is the one that is most impacted by mental health. And now we're talking about taking away any of their access to gender affirming care. That includes their mental health. So it really, really does worry me what we're setting people up for. And like I said, I've got parents that have called me in fear. What do I do? Do we work on documents? Do we leave the state? Do we leave the country? And I don't want to say people should not panic, but I don't think parents should panic. I don't think people should panic either. I do think we still have people in Congress. We still have ways of trying to slow these laws from being put in place. I know injunctions will be put in place so they can be heard further up, and it takes years sometimes for appeals courts for it to finally be heard at the Supreme Court. The case that went before SCOTUS last week about gender affirming care out of Tennessee, I think could shape the next 4 years. And that worries me a bit. I did like some of the questions that were talked about in the audio from the Supreme Court. There were some very interesting, but I did feel from more of the conservative judges that, again, they kind of have their minds made up where they want to go with it. Fingers crossed, and I'm not going to panic until they actually write it. And that's what I tell parents, because as I told somebody, if you are always thinking about the past, what it shoulda, coulda, you're living in depression. If you're thinking about the future, you're living in anxiety. You have to live in the here and now. What can I do today? So I have to think about, what can I do today for my families? What can I do today for my son? What can he do today for himself to keep us going every day? And that really is the tool to it. It's just to keep going. And if you feel like it's too much, pull back. Self-care is a big one. And then I will say that, especially within my trans community, self-care is huge right now. I turned my news feed off the night of the election, the night before the election, and I've not turned it back on, because I just knew, depending on what the results were going to be, depending on headline after headline, that wasn't good for my mental health, because that was going to put me in anxiety for my clients and for my kid. And I can't do as much for my families if I'm in anxiety mode.
There is this, I want to call it magical. Don't even know if that would be the right word, but this magical moment after Trump got elected. And I was walking, for context, I'm right outside of Washington, D.C. So I literally walk across the bridge into D.C., into the Georgetown neighborhood. Nobody was looking at their phone. For the first time, probably in years, I did not see a single person looking at their phone.
Right.
They were talking to their friends. They were talking to their family members. They were walking their pets. I even saw a couple of kids. I've never seen this happen before, but there were 3 kids fishing in the stream. They had their poles and everything, and one of them even reeled in this huge fish, and they put it in a net. It was so cool. But for the first time, people were choosing to connect with other people rather than with their phones.
Right.
That in itself, I feel like, is probably not only speaking to the state of affairs of where things are, but I feel like it's also one of the things that we can really hone in on in times of crisis and times of despair and all of this. And you're touching on this as well. Essentially, you're leaning into community. I'm curious, because this seems to be like one of the like lessons that you've learned, but are there any other lessons, or do you want to expand on this even more? Like, what did all these trials teach you for yourself?
For me, it was really about, it was community, who you surround yourself with. If you're surrounded by people who are negative, that's going to keep you in a negative space. But you have to be careful too that you're not around people who are always happy. That word, I hear it all the time now on LinkedIn the last year or two, but toxic positivity. And I call it toxic positivity because you're pretending to be happy,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's kind of fake it till you make it. And I won't say there's anything wrong with faking it till you make it, because like in nursing school, you faked it till you made it. Like that was just, you acted the part until you felt like you could do the part. Like, that's just, you're expected to do that. But when we're talking about this, it's a little bit, it goes to, you can't fake that. If you're faking that, you're essentially putting on a mask, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you go around telling everybody, look for the positive things in life, that's not reality. Life is not all rainbows and butterflies. I wish it were, but it's essentially, it's not. And so I think you have to realize, once you come to accept that, it's a lot easier to kind of get through your day with that. But for myself, it was just really learning to depend on myself. I really didn't know what that word was. And I think community goes bigger into, community gives us belonging, right? I didn't think I felt like I belonged anywhere. And LinkedIn, when I first came out to LinkedIn like 2 years ago, audio rooms, live stream, I'm like, what is this? This is new. I've never seen this before. Like, what is happening over here? All this conversation was going on. And I would go from room to room to event to learn about all different types of stuff for business or about myself, or that I thought could help my clients in whatever shape or form. And about a year out, I stopped going to as many. And I had surgery this past summer. And so while I was out for surgery, it really gave me time, pulled back to just watch what was going on LinkedIn. And what I finally realized was that I'd gone to a lot of rooms looking for my belonging, looking for my value, looking for my self-worth, because I didn't know how to do those things for myself. I didn't know my value. I didn't know my worth. I don't need any of those rooms anymore, because I know I belong every single place I go. I don't need other people to validate me. I don't need other people to tell me I'm worthy. I'm good wherever I go or don't go. And honestly, that was probably one of my more defining moments, is realizing I was okay if people walked away.
That was a really insightful episode. Wow. Thank you, audiences, for tuning in to Insights. It means the world. I am so grateful that Amber was able to come on to the show to share more about her work and how she became the podcaster and the woman that she is, the parent that she is. It's so fantastic. I'll leave a link to her content below in the comments, so that way you can access that and get to know her more. Be sure to stay tuned for part 2, because we got more of that coming. If you like this episode, be sure to do so. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, let us know what you think. And be sure to stay tuned for more insights. Check out our other platforms, including our Medium and Spotify. You'll check out insights you won't find anywhere else. Be sure to stay tuned for more, and until next time, be well.